So much for joining us for our first episode of LIRS Culture Kitchen. We are thrilled to have Andy Shallal, founder of Busboys and Poets, in the kitchen with us today. I'll tell you more about him in a moment, but I wanted to take a minute to tell you more about the LIRS Culture Kitchen series and why we decided to start it. Few things are more important to people of all cultures than food. Meals are the great uniter. We gather around the table with family, friends, and colleagues for birthdays, holidays, and in times of loss. There's a reason people bring casseroles when times get hard. In every single culture around the world, food plays an essential part in our cultural identities, and sharing food is the equivalent of sharing who you are, providing nourishment for body and soul. In 2020, many of us haven't had the chance to gather around the table with extended family and friends for months. For many immigrants and refugees, that reality is not new to the pandemic. Part of being an immigrant is often leaving your country, your culture, and your family and friends behind. Many of us reconnect to our roots through food. So that's why we started LIRS Culture Kitchen, to celebrate the cultures of immigrants around the country by taking the time to learn a little about them and their favorite dishes. And today, we'll be learning more about Andy. Once again, Andy Shallal is the founder of Busboys and Poets. With 7 locations in the Washington metropolitan area, Busboys and Poets has become home for progressives, artists, and intellectuals, including such notables as Howard Zinn, Cornel West, Alice Walker, and Nikki Giovanni, to name just a few. Andy is an artist and social entrepreneur and has founded or co-founded several peace and justice organizations and holds leadership positions in numerous others. He's on the board of trustees of the Institute for Policy Studies and a founding member of Think Local First DC, a local business association. He also sits on the board of several arts and peace organizations and was appointed by the mayor of DC to head the Workforce Investment Council, an advisory board for the mayor on how to spend workforce development dollars more effectively. Andy, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And as a reminder to our audience, whether we're cooking or conversing, we want you to participate. So please submit your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of our Zoom call. After I ask a few questions of my own, I'll turn to those. Okay, now let's get cooking. So Andy, could you—
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
A bit more about the dish we'll be making today, and then just dive in and get us started?
Sure. This is a staple in Iraqi food. I'm from Iraq originally, born in Baghdad. And as a kid, I remember always having this dish and looking forward when this dish was made. My mother used to make it, and it's made with basically ground beef and some potatoes. It's like a version of corned beef hash. It's an Iraqi version of corned beef hash. We put it as corned beef hash in quotes. It's called maklama, which is hard to pronounce for a lot of people, but gladly people have learned to pronounce it, so now people get used to it and come and order it. So it's really pretty cool. It's a very simple dish. It's made with things that a lot of people like meat and potatoes, and it's made with tomatoes and spices and eggs. Of course, you got to have eggs for breakfast. So this is kind of a dish that's pretty common, but everybody makes it a little bit differently. This is a style that we've adapted here, but other people, will tell you that they don't put potatoes in it, or they may put more tomato in it, or whatever. But would you like me to get started?
Yes, please. Let's do it.
Okay, I'm gonna get started. So the first thing we do is we heat up a pan. You have to have the pan pretty hot. And here with me, by the way, this is David Mejia. He's our chef here. So he's not as camera ready as I was, and obviously I'm the immigrant and he's an immigrant as well, which is pretty cool. Yeah, we have a kitchen with lots of immigrants and people that work here, not only in the kitchen but front of the house as well as our management team. A lot of people are immigrants, so we believe immigrants get the job done, and we are really here as Americans, and we are oftentimes, kind of forgotten in the background, I think, for many of us, but we make a lot of things happen in this country. We add so much to the flavors not only as food, but also to the culture of this country. So anyway, I've got the pan here, which is pretty hot, and then I'm going to put some oil on there. This is some really good olive oil. It's always good to start with good oil because that's kind of the flavor that's going to stick around. Then I'm going to add a little bit of onions and garlic. I'm going to put that in there. I'll let that kind of simmer for a little bit. Get it browned a tad. Now, I started out as cooking, so I've cooked. So I'm a little rusty, so you'll have to forgive me a little bit, but I do know how to cook at some level. And certainly I know how to cook the baklava. Get it nice and brown. You see how it's kind of sizzling and brown, and the smell is wonderful, by the way. I'm going to be adding now the ground beef, really good quality ground beef. Low fat is much better. Obviously, you want it. We use grass-fed beef here at our places, so the grass-fed beef has very little fat, and it tends to have a lot more flavor. You know, the flavor oftentimes you taste in like you know, a lower grade of beef is usually just the grease. So it's nice to be able to taste the real flavor of the beef itself. I'm panning it down here. This dish just takes a few moments to make, really.
And Andy, can I ask you, when did you
Sure.
start making this dish, and who taught you to make it the first time?
Well, I've always loved to cook because I love to eat. So I love to cook, and I watch and I learn. And I've worked as a cook in a couple of kitchens while I was in college and other times as well. So it's something that I've gotten used to, and I enjoy it. I really enjoy cooking, I have to say. So now the ground beef is pretty much done. We're going to add spices. Now the spices are, we have a little bit of beef base to add a little bit more flavor. We have paprika, we have black pepper, we have cumin, we have this is what's the fourth one? This one.
Chili powder.
So,
Chili powder.
chili powder, a little bit of chili powder, and this is obviously the chili powder is a little bit of an addition that we added here to add more flavor, and that's tomato paste. So I'm going to put all these and salt. I'm going to throw all these in there.
And Andy, so I see that it's sort of a dollop of each of those. One
Yes.
of the questions we got from Dina was, how much onion and garlic are you using?
I mean, I used about maybe 2 tablespoons of onions and 1 teaspoon of garlic in this dish. So it's not a lot. And again, this is very adaptable. The beauty of this dish is you can make it any way you want to. You can add things, you can leave things out. A lot of people don't put the tomatoes in there. I like putting the chopped tomatoes in there. It adds a lot more flavor. The acidity of the tomatoes comes through. Okay. Now, we also have some diced potatoes here. So we're going to throw in some diced potatoes on top.
And is that about a cup?
Yes, about a cup of diced potatoes. And you can put more. Some people put less meat. Some people put more potatoes. Again, the beauty of this dish is kind of like a dish of leftovers, really. It's whatever you have. You can throw vegetables in there, for instance. So it's really pretty cool. There's a bit of chopped tomatoes here, some fresh chopped tomatoes we're going to throw in there. And, of course, parsley, which we put in everything in the Middle East. So, and it looks really pretty. See how beautiful it looks? A lot of color.
Very colorful.
Now,
that smells delicious.
oh, now comes the fun part. So we're going to put it in these little casserole dishes. I'm going to put it. So kind of arrange it nicely. And now I'm going to put two little wells in here. And the wells, you'll see what's going to happen. Here. Okay, so we have this dish now. Now we're going to throw this in the oven, and we're going to watch it in just a couple minutes as it cooks.
Wow. All right.
We can talk a little bit while it's in there. It's going to take probably about 5 minutes.
Okay, so we've got several questions specific to this dish, so I'm going to start with them.
Sure.
First, just if you can let everyone know, so you're on location. I realize that my kitchen is not as commercial and amazing as yours. You're at a Busboy location right now?
Yes, I am. I'm at our Brooklyn location at this point.
Okay, fantastic. So one question we have just on the meal is this considered a breakfast meal only?
It's usually, yes. I haven't eaten it any other time, but it's usually a breakfast meal. Now, if you're vegetarian or vegan, you can actually change some of the things in there. You can just do it with just tomato. You can do it with tomato, some vegetables, onions, the garlic, and just stir it up. And you can put either tofu, eggs or something like that in order for you to get that egg flavor in there. But that's it. I mean, it's a very versatile dish.
Yeah, it's
usually eaten at breakfast, because the idea of breakfast should be hearty. It should be something that's going to hold you for the entire day. So that's why we have it for breakfast. This is one of the main dishes. Now, we don't have this every day, obviously, for breakfast. It's usually reserved for the weekends, for times when you have a little bit more time to be able to prepare such a dish.
Okay. And the potatoes, if I remember, our discussion, so you cook the potatoes before you put them in?
Yes, we just blanched them a little bit. So before we put them in the dish to be able to saute them. Now, you can have little shaved potatoes, like hash brown type potatoes in there, or you can have smaller diced potatoes, or you can have slices of potatoes. I've seen slices of potatoes as well in the dish. So any kind of variety like that is acceptable, but they have to be a little bit cooked, because as you can see, we didn't leave it very long. We added the potatoes toward the end. If the potatoes were not cooked, I would have put them probably at the beginning with the onions and the garlic, got them cooked, and then add the other stuff in there.
Okay. And then what is the temperature that you're using in terms of the oven? That's a question.
400 degrees. It's 400 degrees. Okay. Yeah.
And then another question was the green seasoning. Did you say that was parsley that you put in?
Yes. Yes. Chopped parsley.
Got it. Okay. Great. And then just one other question related to the
Sure.
dish. Can this be made vegetarian? What would you recommend?
Yes, the vegetarian version would be just use just tomatoes. Use tomatoes and potatoes. So use a little bit of tomato. There's a version of this that the Lebanese make called shakshuka. And shakshuka is basically diced tomatoes with a little bit of onion, a little bit of green pepper sometimes, and eggs on top. And with a little bit of seasoning, you throw it in the oven, and it's delicious.
That sounds lovely. And then
And you eat it with pita bread. You eat it with bread. You got to have the bread.
Of course. And then is this, another question we had is this served at Busboy and Poets?
Yes, we serve it at Busboys and Poets during our brunch time. So you can get it on Saturdays and Sundays at all of our locations.
Okay, great. All right. And then just a few other questions in terms of, is this a family favorite? Is this sort of a traditional meal?
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, I remember having maklaba was kind of like a highlight. It's kind of a big deal. And it's always good, always delicious, and yeah, we look forward to it. And it's done. You can do it as a family style. You put it in a big pan. You cook all of it, and then you crack 6 or 7 or 8 eggs, depending how many people are going to eat. And each person gets a little section of that pan with the meat.
Oh, that sounds lovely. And then this dish, just curious, why did you decide to put it on the Busboy and Poets menu?
Well, I'm from Iraq, like I mentioned, so we have a few kind of Middle Eastern dishes in there, just kind of throw them in. The whole idea of American cuisine has really, evolved over the years. We've gone from just regular burgers and steaks and potatoes to now we have so much cuisine here in this country. Iraqi cuisine is kind of late to the game a little bit. And so kind of infusing some of that, getting people used to it, getting people used to the pronunciation of it I thought was a really cool thing. And it's really tasty. It's like an international dish. Most people eat this kind of food everywhere in the world. They prepare it differently, but it's a food that's familiar to most people. There's no spices in there or things in there that are completely out of people's already,
Yeah.
fairly sophisticated palate.
Yeah, and just on that point about Iraqi cuisine, but this being really an international dish, what do you think is unique about Iraqi cuisine?
Um, Iraqi cuisine is pretty. It's really a lot of it is very sort of like peasant style cooking, which is more kind of provincial cooking. People eat like family style. We don't serve dishes in individual plates with or with a decoration on the plate, anything like that. It's usually put in a big pot or a big plate in the middle of the table, and people just take whatever they want from it. A lot of it has rice, so rice is very, very common. So almost every dish has rice. I remember my father used to say, "There's no rice, he hasn't eaten." No matter what you serve him, he's got to have the rice.
Same thing.
Yeah, yeah. You got to have bread. The big flat bread that we have, or the what we call samoon, which is kind of like it looks like panini, sort of bread. That's very common. Bread is a really big deal, and in many parts of the world, and certainly Iraq is no exception. Um, it's a kind of food that is a lot of fried, a lot of sauces. So you have the rice and you have a sauce. You have there's a very common white bean sauce. You take white beans, you mix them with like tomato paste and a little bit of tomatoes and put it on top of the rice, and that's delicious. Or you have okra, we have eggplant, we have all kinds of dishes like that. We don't have a lot of vegetables. There's not a lot of vegetables in Iraq to have as part of the meal unless they're cooked. So that's it's because it's a desert climate. We don't really have access to a lot of fresh vegetables all the time. So therefore, using dried vegetables, using dried beans and things like that are much more common in Iraqi cuisine.
Got it. Okay, and then
Let me check and see if this is
yeah.
ready. And it is. Look at it.
That looks beautiful, and yeah, it's sizzling.
It's sizzling. It's delicious. And if I found it correctly, the egg yolk should still be a little bit soft. Yeah. You can see that if I broke it, it would just be egg yolks. It shouldn't be hard eggs. It should be a little bit of yolk that comes out. It spreads across the dish, and it makes it so good to eat. It's really hot, and we let it settle for a minute or two, and then you can just go to town.
Okay, all right. If you, there are several questions about sort of specific measurements, the name of the dish, and how much of each ingredient. So what we'll plan to do is, if it's all right by you, getting the specific measurements. A lot of people are
Sure.
how to do it.
Sure, we'd love to get it to people. Yeah.
We'll make sure that we send that out. But I want to, if you don't mind, just turn to asking you a little bit more about you. So you were born in Iraq and you came to the US when you were still a young boy. I believe you were 10 or 11. Can you talk a little bit about your immigration story? Why did you come to the US? Where did you move to? What do you remember about the move?
I mean, the U.S. was very foreign to us. America was so far. We've been to Europe, we've been to other places, but never been to America. America was out of reach. When you said America, you were saying some exotic, unusual place to go to. I had an uncle that was here who was going to school at GW, law school, and he was kind of the first person here from my family. But my father was stationed here with the Arab League back then. Back in 1966, we came here. He was representing the Arab League, and he was stationed here in Washington, D.C., near DuPont Circle. So we drove up, and I remember the first impression was how everything was so big. The airport is big. It had gleaming, marble, and everything was shiny. a lot of white people. That was one of those things that you immediately notice is everyone looks blonde and looks like they're from a movie set, which is kind of odd because we saw American movies in Iraq. And then driving from the airport, we were at Dulles Airport here in Washington, D.C., and driving to our hotel at that time, the green was incredible. There's so many trees. We don't have a lot of trees in Iraq, certainly not in Baghdad. I remember as a kid, we'd be driving down the street and if you see a tree, you have like families all sitting underneath it in the shade having picnics. So like there's one tree here, one tree there. There's not a group of trees anywhere to be seen. So it's kind of interesting to be able to see the trees. That was really remarkable for me to notice the greenness. And of course, we stayed in the greenest place in Washington, D.C., which is DuPont Circle, which was like, wow, that was really green. And I remember looking out the window and seeing a canopy of trees below me. And it just kind of, it still sticks in my mind.
And just related to that, what was it like growing up in Washington for you?
Well, I mean, we grew up partly here in Washington, then we moved to Arlington, Virginia, and went to school there. It was very, it was a real culture shock for me as a young kid at 10, coming here and attending middle school at that time. Middle school was a very scary place. It's scary anyway. I mean, no matter where you're from, even if you're in your own culture, but coming from a different culture and being at a school here in the United States was really a jarring experience. It certainly was a culture shock for me. And I also had a speech impediment then. I stuttered, so it made it really even that much more difficult. So the stuttering, the lack of language, the being so young and being in a middle school, and then of course looking different than everybody else. America has changed over time. There's a lot more variety of people now, a lot more shades of people now that live in this country. Back then, it was a little bit less than that. It was, you were black or white, and there was not a lot of in between. And so, I was in that kind of in between space. So being an in between was really tough. I mean, you don't know what you are, and they tell you you're supposed to be this, and then you move to another group, they tell you you're supposed to be that. But culturally, you don't fit in either group. So it made it a very complicated process for someone that's young and really trying to sort of figure out who they are to be thrown in that kind of situation made it even that much more difficult.
And obviously, Busboy and Poets is so committed to racial justice issues.
We're going to go to the dining room and continue the conversation, if that's okay.
Sure.
So we're not, let's go for a walk. Right, join me. Yeah.
And if you don't mind, I'll just, as you're walking,
let's continue talking while we're moving. Yeah.
So, just curious, how did you come up with the concept for Busboy and Poets, and what inspired your vision for the idea of a restaurant, bar, bookstore, performance venue?
For me, Busboys and Poets was the kind of place that I wanted to be at. It was I wanted a place that I felt welcomed in, that I felt like I could come in and sit down and break bread, have a cup of coffee, and meet people that are of different backgrounds, different races, different ethnicities. I wanted to be in that kind of a space. And so there wasn't a space like that in Washington, D.C. So I was looking for that space and decided that since I can't find it, maybe I could try making one. And I think that was kind of the impetus behind Busboys and Poets. It's creating a space that I can find my own tribe, a place that I could feel like I belong, a place that made me not feel like I'm an outsider, which is something that I felt, I think, for most of my life.
Yeah, well, and I think that concept, that sentiment is very timely to say right now, because I think there's a lot of people in our audience who feel that sentiment. So Busboys and Poets is dedicated, obviously, to raising awareness about issues of social justice and inspiring change. Can you talk about what you see as the biggest issue facing our country right now?
Well, the biggest issue facing our country right now has been the same issue that's been facing our country since I got here in 1966, race. And it took many, many decades, 5 decades since I've been here, certainly, to see any real movement to address the issue. For many years, I think we were trying to address it in a way that didn't really seem genuine and didn't really go deep into the issues. So I think being able to look at race now in a more realistic way, the impact of race on everything that happens in this country, no matter what you're doing, whether it's school, whether it's healthcare, whether it's policing, certainly, the criminal justice system, incarceration, you name it. All of these things, race is at the forefront. And we have, for too long, I think, tried to ignore it, hoping that somehow it's going to kind of fix itself or go away. And clearly it hasn't. And clearly there's a desperate need to address it. And I really excited, I would say that this is the first time that I really felt like a real American, because I feel like this country has so much to offer. The values that this country has is what brings people to this country, but oftentimes they're disappointed. They're let down because they feel like, oh, the values that you told us about aren't really being played out in the street. They're not being played out in government. And I think now we're seeing, the resurgence of activists going out in the street and being able to fight for things that they believe in, because democracy doesn't just happen. You have to fight for it every single day. And it's I have a shirt that says democracy is a verb. It really is about action. It's not about just going to vote and just forgetting about it. It's really about being involved at all levels of government. And I'm excited to see so many young people, especially, being so deeply involved in their government these days.
And in terms of solving those issues, obviously there's a number of pieces to it. But what role do you see food playing in terms of bringing people together and bridging cultural divides?
Well, I mean, clearly, if there's one thing we all have in common is that we all eat as human beings, and when we eat, we have to break bread at some level, together. I've seen connections made at Busboys and Poets that otherwise would have never happened. This is something I recognized, I think, early on when I got into this business, is the power of food. Food is powerful. In many cultures, food is what brings people together. When you have warring factions, they come at a table and break bread together to make peace. Food is a part of that. So it's really important to make sure that you provide an environment that's conducive to bringing people together and letting them let their guard down. When people start eating, their guard comes down, and they're much more likely to have a more human conversation with the person in front of them than they would otherwise. So having places like this, I think, are essential, really, for the social democratic discourse that happens in any community. You need places where people can connect to one another. We don't have the town square anymore per se. We don't have those types of things, but we do have places like this, like Busboys and Poets and others, where people actually can come, share a meal, break bread, maybe catch some program, hear an author, watch a documentary, and walk away a little bit richer than they did when they walked in. We also have bookstores, and bookstores are essential because they're information. They're all about information. When dictatorships take over, they start censoring books, and there's a reason for that, because books have an impact on people. We have poetry, and poetry is the language of revolution. So we have poetry here that allows people to be able to express themselves in ways that otherwise they maybe wouldn't or couldn't. So I think all of these things add to this kind of amalgam of rich, frothy, democratic discourse that I think helps to shape communities and make them stronger and better and much more connected.
I think that is so beautifully put, and I can't thank you enough for creating and protecting such spaces, especially right now. So we're going to turn now to questions from the audience. Just as a reminder, you can put your question in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. So the first question that I'll ask, so what is your favorite dish that you've designed for Busboy and Poets?
I get involved in many of the dishes at the beginning, especially. I wanted to make sure that the dishes we have are dishes that are accessible, that have sort of they're well made, well procured, really good quality products, but also not too fancy, not off-putting to people that may not be familiar with some of the food and items that we have here. So I wanted to make simple things. I love simple food. So for me, I'm moving more toward more of a vegetarian sort of focus. So we have a new dish here that I'm just falling in love with, which is they're cauliflower bites, and they're little bits of cauliflower that are deep fried, and there's a dipping sauce that goes with them, and they're just absolutely delicious. So those types of things I think are, my taste evolves and changes over time. I don't really like the same thing all the time. I try to use a variety of things. I also feel like I'm part of the quality control of the place. So I try to eat different dishes all the time. So I don't have a favorite per se, but if I had my brothers and it's a rainy day, I'll probably have a grilled cheese sandwich with tomato soup. That would be my default item.
Sounds like a good recommendation for a day like we're having, at least if you're tuning in from the DC metro area.
Yeah.
One question from Kala is, what is a memory you have of being around the table, enjoying the meal?
Well, there are so many memories. I mean, a lot of my life is around the table. My parents were very social people. They entertained all the time. So we had people coming in and out of our house all the time. My mother, I remember like the days that she didn't have anybody, she was preparing. She was like a prep cook. So she would be preparing dishes, freezing them or putting them away for that minute that my father was going to call on his way from work and say, "Oh, we have 10 friends coming over." And she was remarkable. I mean, she would have a full on dinner for 10 people literally within 30 minutes, and that was really pretty remarkable. So my memories around the table are always having a lot of people. We weren't the kind of family that had like a schedule where everybody sat down at dinner and everybody kind of told their story for the day. I've always seen those kinds of movies, and I've always thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have that? But we had a different style. Everybody ate whenever they wanted to, but there were people all the time around the house eating. So you always had somebody to sit down with and have a meal with, or grab a bite with. A lot of things that happen. Like anytime I want to meet somebody, I'm usually meeting them over food. So for me, food is like a way to connect with people at a much deeper level than otherwise you would.
Another question we received was, what advice would you give for those who have a dream to open their small business one day?
Really make sure you love what you're doing. A lot of times I think people want to open a restaurant, for instance, just because they think it's a business, and it's a very tough business, has a lot of moving parts, and the chances of failure are fairly high. So just opening a restaurant because you just think it's a good business proposition, probably not the best idea. There are other better business propositions that are far easier. But if you love people, if you love connecting with people, if you love food and what food does, I think it's a wonderful business. But I would recommend that definitely work in the business at all levels. Not just as a waiter or as a cook, but work at all levels in the business. I remember working in many, many different places, from dishwashing to cooking to bartending to waiting to managing, all of these things. And I understood the power of food, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to create places that you can connect people that otherwise wouldn't have a chance to connect with? Because I saw those connections firsthand that people made when they were sitting at the table, and it was really remarkable. And people come to restaurants for many different reasons. They come because they want to celebrate something. They want to come because they want to mourn something. They come because they want to meet someone. They want to come here because they're having a first date, and they want to be able to get to know the person they're with. So restaurants have become really kind of the center spot, I think, for many, many Americans. I mean, you see what's happening right now during COVID, where restaurants were kind of considered essential, at some level. People need to have places like this to go to. and it was great to see the support that we've had so far. Anyway, but thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think just the fact that we can see a little bit of what's happening behind you, it's nice to see, businesses and busyness and just the bustle. So thanks for allowing us
Yeah,
to your restaurant.
absolutely.
When we were behind the scenes at the beginning of the conversation, you introduced us to, one of your employees, one of the staff there,
Yes,
and
David Mejia.
David, right. And so I just wanted to ask because, I think you had a great reference to Hamilton in terms of immigrants get the job done.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about some of the employees that you've worked with. At LIRS, we have a couple programs dedicated to workforce development because we know that we got to fight this fiction of immigrants coming here to steal your jobs with the fact, which is that, immigrants such as yourself are not job takers, they're job makers, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Tell
Yep,
us
we have 450 employees right now. So this is one immigrant that created 450 jobs. So it's not really. I don't think immigrants are taking jobs from anybody. I think they oftentimes end up doing really jobs that nobody else wants, frankly, and that's really important. I mean, if you look at the people that are washing the dishes, the people that are cleaning your tables, most of them are immigrants. And that's we all get started at some level, at some place, and I think this is it opens up opportunities for people. And who knows, that busboy, that waiter, that whoever is working may really fall in love with the restaurant business and decide to make it bigger and open up places. In fact, we've had people that worked here as bussers, as waiters, as cooks, who left here, opened up their own places, and now employ a lot more people than obviously just them. So I think there's that's a very xenophobic, fear-based kind of assumption about immigrants. Immigrants really, I mean, this country is built on immigrants. I mean, honestly, I mean, of course, Black people were enslaved and brought here that really built the country in the first place, but immigrants then came and added to that, and made this country, you know, work in ways that it wouldn't have otherwise.
and just one question related to that we got from Kim is, what is, just based on your comment now, just now, what role do you think that immigrants can play in terms of racial justice, and obviously everything that we've seen around the country on this issue?
Well, immigrants, I think, are the bridge. Oftentimes, I always see myself, for example, being the other, because the main issue in this country really is, as I mentioned, is race. And I'm not talking about just any race. I'm talking Black and white is the foundation upon which this country was built, and the DNA that this country has embedded into its body. Um, so immigrants, I think, oftentimes can become that bridge because they come from outside and see things with fresh eyes. You know, a lot of times people that travel and go outside this country come back here and think like, this is kind of crazy. Like, this is not how it's supposed to be. So they come up with new ideas and new ways to present to folks that have been used to a certain way. And suddenly you have a change that happens. A lot of folks, especially Black artists and thinkers and philosophers and writers had to leave this country in order for them to really hone their skill and be able to learn because they could not live under this oppression and be able to be their full selves. So they left. For people like Langston Hughes, that Busboys of Poets is named after, or people like James Baldwin or others left this country to be able to actually start to think, because you can't really think when you're under an oppressive condition. You want to be able to go away from that and see the world differently. And Langston Hughes traveled because he realized that racism in this country was something that he did not want to have to live under, and discovered that the fact that the rest of the world, things don't have to be this way, that he was able to sit at a bar next to a white person in Paris, for instance. So this was an eye-opening experience for him, and he traveled all over the world, went to Kazakhstan, went to Russia, went to other places, and learned a lot about different cultures. when he came back, he had a whole new idea, a whole new fresh look at America, and saw the flaws that America has, the possibilities that America can provide, and wrote about it in his poetry. So I think immigrants can really act as that bridge. They also, I think, immigrants, come to this country because of the values that this country stands for. They don't come for the plumbing. They come for the values. They come here and they become kind of the insurance policy, really, in some ways, to uphold those values, because they've left their country, they've left their comfort, and they've come here for something better. And if it's not better, then they're going to fight and want it to be better. They're going to make it better. They're going to want to make it better. And I think they become that sort of voice of consciousness that oftentimes I think is necessary, that comes from outside, oftentimes, that taps you on the shoulder and says, maybe that's not the way it's supposed to be. Let's think differently.
I couldn't have said it more poetically, so thank you for sharing those thoughts with us. Before you leave, I know that some are just tuning in as they've started their lunch hour. So would you mind just giving us a quick recap in terms of the dish that is beautifully laid there in front of you, and just quickly kind of
Sure.
what mostly the main ingredients that were in it?
Sure. So this is what we call makhlama. It's I'm going to hold it up like this a little bit. It's made with ground beef, onion, garlic, some herbs and spices, and you see some parsley there. And then once it's cooked, and potatoes and ground beef, and once we cook those ingredients in a skillet, we crack 2 eggs or 1 egg or 3 eggs, whatever you want, and we put it in the oven. The eggs get a little bit hardened, and then you serve it like that. You eat it with bread. You eat it, just dig right in, eat it with bread. And it's a breakfast dish. It's a very common breakfast dish in Iraq, and it's called nakhlama. It's hard to pronounce for many people, but interestingly enough, because so many people like it and order it here at our place, they've learned how to pronounce it. So it's really cool to see, people that don't know Arabic and don't know how to be able to say it. It's kind of fun to watch. But people have learned it, and it's a great dish, one of our most popular.
Well, it's, as you said, introducing a new dish, forcing people to say a pronunciation that is slightly different, that's enrichment. And I really can't thank you enough for spending the time with us to enrich us in terms of this wonderful, delectable Iraqi dish. For those who are just tuning in terms of the specific ingredients and the measurements, we will be sending out an email so that you can make it at home. As Andy mentioned, it is also served at Busboys and Poets on the weekends. So if you're a little more lazy, you can obviously go there and find it. Andy, really, thank you so much for joining us. Those in the audience, thank you for participating. This is the first in Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services Culture Kitchen, but we will be continuing this series. So keep an eye out for our next LIRS Culture Kitchen event, which we'll be announcing very soon. Again, Andy and your team, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. From all of our team to yours. Thank you so much. Stay safe.
Thanks again.
And vote.